Yo, what's up? This is Jay Dennis, and we're back with another episode of Talking NuMetal. And today we are talking about one of my all-time favorite bands, KORN, and their newest album, which as of today has been out for 9 days. This is the story of a girl. Anyway, yeah, KORN, man. It's one of those, I think that's the band that actually launched this whole little mini series within my channel. If you go back to the Talking NuMetal series, you'll see back in 2016 I did pretty much a video on all of their albums up until at that point Serenity of Suffering, and then of course a few years ago I did a ranked and reviewed of all their albums, including 2019's The Nothing, which that included a little bit more of a review. And yeah, I've pretty much talked about every KORN album, studio album, except for Path of Totality. I don't usually include that in the ranking, and even if I did, it'd be at the bottom. So nothing against dubstep. I just don't think that that's, really part of KORN's legacy, in my opinion. But we're here to talk about the early 2022 release of Requiem. I got a 9-track album. Spent, 9 days digesting it. It's like a song a day. And it's a 33-minute album. So, I'm going to go over some pros and some cons and maybe mention where it would place on my existing KORN ranking. So, it led with the single Start the Healing, which I actually really enjoyed when it came out. I think it didn't get, it might have gotten like mixed reception, but it sounded a little different than what they had put out with The Nothing, but I like the direction it was going in. I like the kind of evil melodic sound that was a little reminiscent of like the Paradigm Shift, but like maybe some other more experimental stuff that maybe you would have heard on See You on the Other Side. So, of course, I was excited to hear the rest of the album when it came out. I don't really remember listening to any of the other singles or releases ahead of time. So, I've digested the album as a whole quite a few times. And frankly, compared to their other efforts, it's a little underwhelming. Now, because KORN's one of my favorite bands, that probably means they can do no wrong and are pretty much incapable of putting out a bad album. Even Path of Totality and KORN 3 aren't bad albums. They're just not great relative to the rest of their discography. And unlike Serenity of Suffering or The Nothing, which are the last two albums that came out before this, Requiem didn't hit me anywhere near as hard. Probably because the album's not as long. There's only 9 tracks. It's September of 2019 when they released The Nothing. So they've had maybe 2.5 years, give or take. 2.5 years to release another full-fledged album. And with their release schedule, 2.5 years is a reasonable amount of time. Not that they're obligated to the fans to churn out music every so often. They have an amazing legacy behind them, and anything else they do moving forward is fucking gravy, and it's a gift. My gift to you. But, with touring, with COVID, with, some of the members getting sick, I'm happy and surprised, and yeah, just the fucking period of time that's happened since 2019. This fucking pandemic era has just been a blur. So this still felt like a gift. But aside from 1 or 2 songs on this album, nothing really excites me. I still gave the album an 8.4 out of 10, which means it's a B album. But aside from the song Disconnect and maybe the final track, Worst Is On Its Way, rest of the album is either, good, or I can just kind of do without it. Trying to think of how to package this. So, in terms of sound, the way I said that Serenity of Suffering sounded like certain albums combined, like Issues, Untouchables, maybe a little Paradigm Shift, or I forgot exactly what I said. Maybe a little Take a Look in the Mirror. The Nothing sounded like fucking its own identity with a little bit of KORN 3 in there. KORN 3 being like that raw, trying to recapture a certain energy sound, a lot of clunky sounding nu metal guitar riffs. Excuse me while I sip my bubbly. I got a similar feel when I listened to Forgotten, the opening track. It opens up like a pretty solid KORN album. But I think what this album is missing is just vocal energy, which that can be a lot to demand from somebody after so many years. But just the explosiveness that I even heard in the Nothing, or of course Serenity of Suffering, it's just not present on this album. This album sounds kind of... What the fuck is the definition of Requiem anyway? I'm thinking of Retribution. That's like revenge. Requiem definition. Let's see. A mass for the repose of the souls of the dead, a musical composition, settling parts of an act or token of remembrance. Okay, so if anybody from KORN or Jonathan Davis, who is also from KORN, is listening to this, I'm not here to disparage any lyrical meanings or anything. I know that you've been through a lot of family tragedy and are still putting out music, and we love you. This review, this Talking NuMetal, is not meant to diss the album. I'm just giving my thoughts on it. It just, I don't know, man. It just doesn't have the same energy or the same power that the Nothing had, which was released on the heels of him losing his wife. I mean, it's hard because, again, I'm not being critical here. I'm just trying to be sensitive to the fact that while KORN, regardless of what they're going through, are capable of putting out masterpiece albums, I still believe they got a little bit of a handicap. There's room for grace where if something isn't always met to like extremely high standards. There were no songs on this album that were a 9 out of 10 or higher. I gave Disconnect an 8.8 out of 10, which means like a B+. I love that song, Disconnect. Start the Healing does have a memorable chorus, and I think so does Let the Dark Do the Rest. My Confession, The Worst Is on Its Way, that beatboxing that he does. There's a little bit of old school KORN elements in this album, which are nice, especially the little bass outro at the end of the album. It kind of reminds you of like an older KORN album. But like I said, man, just 9 tracks, barely over half an hour long. They've, it's been long enough. This isn't like a year after the Nothing. This is almost 2.5. I feel like they could have put out more material if they wanted to. I don't hate the album. I've listened to it from front to back a few times. The songs that bored me were Lost in the Grandeur and Hopeless and Beaten. Those just sounded like filler songs to me. The vocal hooks just aren't as present. Jonathan Davis's singing style has gotten a little bit softer. There's really no explosive vocals in this album, at least relative to other ones. So the big, loud choruses that you would hear on Untouchables, or if we're going more recent, even Serenity of Suffering or The Nothing, there were big, loud choruses on those albums. There were more hooky guitar riffs and more dynamics, but this album just sounds like almost kind of one long song where it all just kind of blends into each other. And if that's what they were going for, cool. But for my particular tastes in KORN, this album just doesn't do it for me compared to the other albums. So I think this is the weakest album they've put out since KORN 3. That being said, I still think it's better than KORN 3. I think my ranking is the bottom albums are KORN 3 and then Paradigm Shift and then Untitled. I'd put this between Paradigm Shift and KORN 3. This is their second weakest album, not including Path of Totality. I just have to make that distinction there. So if you're a KORN fan, you're a NuMetal fan, definitely still worth listening to it. It is still very much worth listening to. And shit, if you can find a place where they sell it, buy the album. Support the artist, man. Like, I still love this band. I still enjoyed listening to this album. It just didn't give me the same feel or the same excitement that their last couple releases have. And I initially said the same thing about The Nothing, where originally I thought The Nothing was lower on the list. But then a year later, when I did my updated ranking for this band, The Nothing jumped, I think, to the top 5 because it aged really well. I don't foresee that happening with this album. I think there's just not enough variety or enough spice or enough new material or excitement here to get me to change my mind on this. There was nothing excellent on this album, but there was nothing short of great. Every song sat between an 8 out of 10 and an 8.8 out of 10. It's just a solid B album. Okay, KORN? You got a B on this one, okay? I'm a generous guy. I love you guys. Thank you for putting this album out. It's got a couple great songs on there. Start the Healing, Disconnect, My Confession, Worst Is on Its Way. But And maybe Let the Dark do the rest. There you go. A little over half the album is pretty solid. The other songs, meh, I can skip them. So be sure to check out the rest of my channel. Usually I do ranked and reviews and stuff, so like bands' discography, so be sure to check out the one I did of KORN, or the Talking NuMetal playlist, where I have talked about all their albums in far more depth compared to my ranking and reviewed. Also, recently did Limp Bizkit's newest album, which came out on Halloween of last year, so subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with. I've seen mixed reviews. I've seen a lot of people herald this album as something incredible, and in its own way it is, because KORN are fucking gods of not just nu metal, but of metal. Like, they're one of the best bands in the world, in my opinion. So, but let me know what you agree with or disagree with. Did this album come up short, or do you think that this is for some reason one of their best albums? Let me know.